Okay, so this issue just came up today while I was working with a student in a mentor session. And it was about how do you deal with when you need multiple API fetches and you need to link things together in a particular area of your DOM. Now, this particular student is currently progressing along and using jQuery at the moment. There would be different solutions here if you were to use React, for example. But I wanted to make this talk accessible for people who are perhaps just starting out on their web journey and may still be using jQuery, which is an excellent library to learn fundamentals of the DOM and forces you to wire up more of the interactions, which gives you a little bit greater insight into exactly what's going on underneath the hood. So in this particular student's case, they needed to start with an API request that was going to return a list of items. And so let's just say that we can represent those. I'm not going to do both API requests. Let's just say that our first request gives us something like a list of items here. And then the next task is to append these to the DOM. So using jQuery, we're going to create, a listener for when the DOM has loaded, and in our case, all we're appending to the DOM is a simple div with a class of container. And then so when that's ready, we're going to invoke this start function, and then and inside the start function, we're going to invoke append items. And what that is basically is just taking the array of items and using the higher order function for each, taking each item and locating the container, and then appending each item to the container, which is the div on our page. So a simple beginning, but then the next challenge that this student was having was, well, they needed to then do a separate API call, which was going to get some supporting information about each of the items that came back from the first request. So for example, they then were going to construct a new URL and get an image related to the first list. And the question was, how do you do that? Query an external API and then actually match up the results so that they line up on your page. And so we talked about promises, the native promise implementation, and using Promises.all. And we actually worked out a pretty cool solution together today, and so I thought I would just share that here. So the next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and set up a container so that for each of these items, not only are we going to now append each item to the DOM, but we're going to build up a list of promises that we're going to then invoke with Promise.all in order to get the supporting information that we need about each of these items. So the first thing I'll do is create a container for the promises that we're going to construct, and just set it equal to an empty array. And now when we go through each item, one thing that I want you to notice is that each of the LIs that we have appended to the page are identical. There's nothing that can be used to tell any of those apart. So we want to construct something unique that can be used as a class name for each LI so that we can actually target it later. This will make a little more sense when you see what we're trying to do in a moment. So what I want to do is inside of our for each, our loop here, is we want to create a constructed class. And what we're going to do is set it equal to the item, which in this case is a string, apple, bat, cat, or drum, depending on the iteration of the loop that we're working on. And then just for good measure, let's append a unique integer to it. Now we don't have access to the integer I yet, which relates to the index of the current element that we're inspecting in the items array, but we can add it in as the second argument to the function passed into our higher order for each function. We just do that by assigning that to the second parameter here. Now we can actually call that index if we wanted to, and then we would change this to index, but we're going to use I just as a convention. And now we have a constructed class that is based on the string and its and the index number. So we get apple 0, bat 1, cat 2, and drum 3. So that's exactly what we're looking for here. And close the console for now. Okay, so now that we have something unique, we want to actually adjust what we are appending to the DOM. And so our li element now is going to receive a class, and it's going to be equal to the constructed class variable that we worked out in the previous line. So if we inspect the LIs now, I want you to notice that the LI class now has apple 0, bat 1, cat 2, or drum 3, which is great because later we may have great use for that if we want to go ahead and actually target these elements after we get the supporting material that we're going to need. And in this case, I'm going to use just a simple API to get some random images, and we're going to append them in the correct place in the DOM. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we've created our collection for the promises that we're going to build up. Now we're going to go ahead, and we're still inside this same append items function here. Inside of our loop, we're going to construct the promises that we are going to need to resolve later. Okay, so next is after we have appended the items to the DOM, we are going to now initialize a promise. So we're going to say var p equals new promise. Let me close this the console for a second because it seems like it's slowing things down on the page a lot. And so our new promise is going to be constructed where we pass in the anonymous function, which takes two arguments, resolve and reject. Now remember, those are conventions. You can actually name them whatever you want, but every promise implementation pretty much everywhere uses resolve and reject as that standard, so let's stick with that. And what we're going to do is use the native fetch API. And fetch is a promise compliant specification, so it's thenable, you could say. After we fetch a particular URL, we can use .then, and after we get the return from our fetch, we'll be able to resolve our promise with the URL that we're going to get back. So I'm going to use HTTPS and make a call to aws.random.cat/meow. Now this will return us a random cat image, or rather it will return us a URL that points to a random cat image. Now what's important to know is that this is not getting the images themselves, but is giving us a pointer that we can attach to an image tag, and then the browser can then load the image from that resource. Okay, so fetch, what it returns if it's successful is we can say we get back an image result. It's not usable yet in that form. When we use the fetch API, we have to return, we have to invoke the .json method, and that returns something which is then a usable JSON object. Then, and this is generally done in two separate steps, .then to return the image.json, and then the next one is the actual image JSON object itself. And so this will be an image object. I'll show you what I mean by that. If we go ahead and actually look at this URL, we get back some JSON. And it is a JSON object with the key value pair, the key being file and the value being the URL. If we click on that, you'll see it actually resolves to a random cat image. Okay, so knowing that this is the structure of what we're calling from aws.random.cat/meow, this will help us when we figure out what we need to do with that result. So we now have the image object, which is an object with a file key in it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to return an object that has two key value pairs. The image is the image object itself, or we could say image object.file, since that's the value that we want out of it. And the location, now this part is what we're going to do. After the promise resolves, we need to know where we want to put that image. So we're going to need to use this later. So I'm going to I'm going to set the value of the location key to constructed class. And that is the unique identifier we came up with. That's the combination of the item string and the current index value of the current iteration of the loop that we're in when we go through the items. Okay, so our fetch ultimately is going to return these two values here, but I need to actually wrap these in an object, because what we're going to do is after we get the image object, we are going to resolve the promise. And what I mean by that is we need to resolve the promise that we are constructing here with the new promise constructor, and it's the value of it is going to be the image, which is the URL, and the location, which is where we're going to put it later. So that is okay. So we're finished. We're going to resolve after that promise resolves, and this is what we need to do. So we need to now push this into our promise container, the collection that we've created. So we'll say resolve promises, and let's push the promise. Sorry. Let me see. I'm in the wrong area here. We're going, after we have this, I need to be right outside of where we create the promise. Okay, so promise collection dot push p. So we're building up an array of promises. Let's go ahead and just outside of the loop, let's console log the promise collection and make sure that we've got a built up set of promises. So okay, we do. All these errors here are coming because each time I type, the code pen will go ahead and execute the code here and say what's in various states of non-completion. So, but this is ultimately what we want to see. We have an array of resolved promises. We're not doing anything with the resolved promises yet, but if we look at it, we can see that we actually have 4 promises that resolved with an image, as well as the location it's going to go later. This is fantastic. That means our plumbing is working. We just need to append the result using some further functions. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a resolve promises function, or let's say let's instead of resolve promises promise collection, and this is where we're going to use promise.all. Okay, and so here's what we need to do. We need to actually build out our resolve promises function, which will use promise.all to get all those resolved promises. And then after we have the results, we're going to append those results to the DOM in the right place. This stopped here right now because we have an error, because of course resolved promises is not a function yet. So we're going to build that function resolve promises, and it is going to take in, let's see, a collection. And here's what it's going to do. All right, so we're going to use the native promise.all, which takes an array of promises. And then when we have that result, after all those promises have resolved, after all of them have resolved, and not before, we will be able to, let's console log the result and see what we get here. We'll wade through the error messages and just get the final result there. Okay, it's an array of those 4 values that were fetched from the aws.random website. And not only that, but it's also the location where we need to put it. Okay, so since we're going to have access to that here in this function, we can go ahead and create a function called append extras, and let's pass it the result. Okay, so function append extras is going to take, an array of results, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to say array.forEach, and then for each item that came back, we are going to append it to a particular location. So we're going to use jQuery and use template literal syntax with the backticks and say dot, because we have to start our jQuery search with a dot for the class name we're looking for. And then we use our $sign and our bracket notation to put in item.location. So this is where we're going to put it. And that comes from the item in the array. And what we're going to put in there is we're going to append an image tag, and we won't add style yet. The source of that image is going to be equal to, we'll use our template literal variable substitution container here, and we'll say item dot image. Is that what we called it? I have to just refer back down here. Image and then location. So yeah, item dot image, and then let's close that tag. And if this worked, wow, check it out. So we've got 4 gigantic cat pictures. So let's make sure we can see those on the page, and we'll do some just quick and dirty inline styling. So we'll say, width of 50 pixels and height of 50 pixels. And, oh, very interesting. We've got 4, 3, 2, and then 1 of those. Okay, so something is not quite yet hooked up right. But I'm happy to see that we have, I think I pushed the promise into our container in the wrong part of our loop is what I'm guessing here, just from the fact that we have the first one 4 times, the second one 3 times, and so on. Okay, so promise.collection, after we create, right, so we're resolving the promises in the loop. That is a big mistake. So we need to go outside of the loop, and 1 second, please. And once we get outside the loop and only resolve our promises once, then suddenly everything clears up. So we now have all the things just right next to that. What if we wanted to have something that was, actually create another container inside the LI? So if we were to go ahead and add a div inside there, then when we append, we can search for the div here. So let's do item location dot find. We'll look for a div, and then append to that div. So just kind of like give it a little more space. Okay, so I think I broke something. Right, of course. We need to probably put that inside the LI, and then that's why we can find it within the LI because it's now in there. Okay, so this has been, to overview, this has been a discussion of how you can construct promises with information that is available at the moment you are working through a loop, and then resolve those promises later along with that information that you had stored in order to line up the information you got from your second API call. So in the case of the project that my student was working on, this list here was originally generated from a first API call. And then they needed to get some images that would support those results. The question was, how do you append these to the DOM and then also append the supporting material to the DOM after your second API call returns? And so what we came up with was a nice way of dealing with asynchronous code, and by setting a unique location and building that into the promise that would then be resolved, so that after your promise is resolved, you would know where to put it. So I will post this video along with the URL of this pen on CodePen, and you are welcome to play with it. Press fork and you can create your own versions. And if you have any comments, please feel free to post them below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you very much for watching. Take care.